Happy Hump Day, and welcome back to another live stream episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. I am your host, Sarah, joined by John and one of my besties and favorites, Pepe, a little under the weather, but thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. How are you?
Great pleasure to be with you guys. I apologize in advance to you and to the audience because I am in a little bit of a jam. There was a virus somewhere in Dubai or in Iraq, and wow! So as I told Sarah, I'm taking a Kingzao antibiotic, but for the moment, no target. So apologies in advance.
None needed. And John, how are you? We haven't spoken. We took the whole weekend off. I was a good employer today or this week, I guess.
Yeah, you were pretty easy on me. So
but,
thank you for that.
ACP was not easy on you. ACP.
But no, just life in general. But that's how it goes. That's how it is for us. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to getting into this. Pepe, it's all right. You can take the Kinzol now, honestly, if you want to, and we can just get a little bit loopy with it.
Yeah, we'll get loopy. So tell us. Nobody goes to Iraq. Now this week, everybody goes to Iraq. What were you guys doing over there, and how much did you like it?
I'm sorry. Wow, this trip for me, this trip was quite emotional because I worked a lot in Iraq. Even before shock and awe, I visited Iraq during the last months of Saddam in 2002, the Axis of Evil era, and then I returned before shock and awe after that, and many times before the petrol surge and all that. So Iraq, it's part of my life as well. And this time, you have no idea. I was in shock as I left the airport already. And especially when we were arriving in Baghdad. For the first time in over 3 decades, you could feel right away a certain sense of normalcy, which is something that Baghdad was always extremely tense. And of course, in the early 2000s, beyond dangerous, right? So you see very, very few checkpoints left, only near government buildings in the green zone. You see greenery everywhere. You see brand new cars, which is something that you wouldn't see a few years ago. Chinese, by the way. Bustling commerce everywhere. New malls, new restaurant complexes by the Tigris. So this is an enormous shock the day that you arrive. And then when you start talking to people, and especially with the new government, by Prime Minister Mohammed Soudani. Very, very smart, very competent. He's in power since October 2022, so it's not much, right? But you can see that you can see that they are finally turning those horrible pages. It's been amazing. We were basically guests of the office of the Prime Minister, in fact, for a conference, and then the day after the conference, one of those unforgettable experiences in our lives when we were taken to Karbala. I'll get into it in detail. But the conference was something fascinating because the concept basically came from the office of the Prime Minister. They were tying up Karbala and Arba'in, which is this absolutely outstanding Shiite commemoration of the 40th day of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, which is sacred for all Shiites. They were tying it up with Al-Aqsa and the plight of the Palestinians. Can you imagine an Arab government doing that? None of them did, but Iraq did. And this in itself was already very impressive. So the day of the conference, of course, many of us spoke, of course. There were a lot of young bloggers from the Arab world, very, very young, most of them in their early 20s. They had never been to Iraq. So for them, the notion of the American invasion and occupation 20, 21 years ago, it's bypasses them completely, you know. And they were stunned by what they saw, this new resurgent Iraq, you know. And at the same time, there were first-class Palestinian writers and bloggers as well. So the conference was wonderful in terms of uh, a more or less general overview of the plight of the Palestinians, what can be done to stop the genocide, which obviously none of us writers will be able to do, but at least no, the options uh, across the spectrum. Short of a military intervention, we know that this is not going to be stopped. And then immediately after that, the day after, they took us to Arbain in Karbala via Soviet helicopter. Perfect. So you leave Baghdad from a military base by the Tigris, and the commander in Karbala, wonderful guy, Commander Tashin, he had instructed the pilot to fly over the pilgrim route. So it was absolutely outstanding to be there and following the routes. Those pilgrims dressed in black with their backpacks, waving banners, Imam Hussein banners, Palestinian banners as well, banners from their own countries, Azerbaijan, Sudan, Pakistan, etc. Walking all the way. And then as you get closer to Karbala, the crowds get thicker and denser, you know, and then it's this enormous sea of people converging towards the Hazrat Abbas shrine in magnificent shrine in Karbala. But obviously nobody could get there at the time. This was before the end of last week. It was already packed for days. So the best, we got the second best option, which was to stay more or less 5 kilometers away from the shrine, but in a compound that was dedicated to Al-Aqsa. And it's fascinating because they set up an exhibition, you know, the military prowess of Hamas during the war. Of course, praising the dead, praising the victims. There were lecturers, there were imams dropping in, there was a mosque on the other side of the street, people preaching, and in the middle, this flow of humanity. And then a lot of people would look at it. They saw a replica of Al-Aqsa, you know. There was even a road sign written, Al-Aqsa Mosque, 833 kilometers, which is the exact distance from Karbala to Jerusalem, right? And they would stop, you know, they would talk, confraternize with the Palestinians, etc. And then they would keep walking. Fascinating. Whole families, you know, babies, absolutely outstanding. It's one of the most, probably the biggest urban movable feast in the world. We learned the next day via the management of the Abbas Shrine that this year there were 21.4 million pilgrims going to Karbala for Arbain. So you are right in the middle of this 21 million, and everybody, you can feel the energy in the air. It's something beyond extraordinary. It's a feeling of resistance, of course, a feeling of understanding the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, of course, and at the same time, understanding the martyrdom of the people in Gaza and in Palestine nowadays. And the merit of the Iraqi government is that they made this connection. And this was very clear for all these 21 million who were there, and for the population as well, for everyone in Baghdad as well. So it's very, very sophisticated. Only, I would say that only a civilizational state can think conceptually in these terms. And now you see that they are starting over finally.
Mhm.
And so this was the major takeaway of this trip. I revisited many of the places that I used to go before, including a famous literary cafe. When I stepped in, the guy said, I remember you. And I almost fell on the floor because he remembered me when I was there in 2020, 2002, because there were no foreigners in Baghdad in 2002. I was there with my Brit American photographer, and we spent the whole day. And he was taking photos of the people who were hanging out at the cafe. I was trying to talk to some of the writers, etc. And it was practically empty at the time, and it was very, very sad. And after that, at least the cafe was more or less rebuilt. Now it's impeccable. The street is rebuilt. It used to be a bombed out street completely after 2003. Most of the streets in downtown, which were scenes of bombing and shootings everywhere, they are rebuilt and back in business. So you get the feeling of a country finally back on its legs, and it's a quite emotional experience.
I do want to play. Well, I do want to play a short video that I found while you were in Iraq. I don't know when it was taken, but it looks pretty recent, and I want to get your opinion on it. This is evidence of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to
Well, I'm gonna have to add that to one of my propaganda pieces.
Yeah,
that was a cool video.
Good piece of China's starting to get really good soft power when we work with the tools they're giving us. But how was it? Did you see the new infrastructure?
But it gives all of you a pretty good idea of how fast they are developing and especially rebuilding. Even they're going to start finally soon to do the metro, which is something that's been going on for decades. Okay, they will start the metro. They are building a lot of new highways needed because it's an enormous conurbation, and there's a sort of LA feeling to Baghdad as well. You need to go on a freeway to go from A to B, essentially, and on the Belt and Road angle, that's very, very interesting because it's one of the hubs of the Belt and Road in West Asia. And then there will be the meeting of two corridors, essentially. One strategic corridor from the port of Basra, and then going inland, and then through Turkey, and from Turkey to Europe. This has already started. It's an enormous project, very expensive, $17 billion, but already on, and should be inaugurated in 2028, so only 4 years. And later on, this will interconnect to the Belt and Road arriving in Iraq. So China will be connected to Turkey and Europe via this southern corridor, let's put it this way, and Iraq will be the fulcrum of this corridor. So this is beyond huge. Of course, the people at the Prime Minister's office, they were very discreet talking about Chinese investment because they don't want to antagonize the West as well. So it's a fine balance. You see, they were talking a lot about doing business with the European Union, and of course there are European Union missions in Baghdad all the time. But we could sense that for them, the really important development axis is Belt and Road, and it's China. No question about that.
Well, interestingly enough, there is a quote, and I think you wrote it on either Telegram or Twitter, but there's a few quotes regarding Karbala and its connection to Al-Aqsa, and you already touched on that. So what an interesting parallel as China rebuilds Iraq, who, while they haven't been able to materially take a very staunch stance in the Palestine-Israeli, they have done so vocally. They have said multiple times they don't enter negotiations with a country they do not recognize, and they're the only people that have actually vocalized that in this process. So it's really interesting to watch Iraq build up while Gaza is inevitably going to be need to be rebuilt. So what do you think about that? Like, what's that connection? Do you think that there is a chance in all of this that we somehow watch the successes that are happening in places like Iran and Iraq, and that can transfer over to Palestine?
Hopefully, yes. There was a very interesting dynamic talking about people, part of the government. They don't mention the axis of resistance. It's a very, very touchy subject because, of course, they know that for the US and Israel, the axis of resistance is worse than evil, right? But, of course, Kataib, Hezbollah, and Hashd al-Shabi are extremely, extremely present and active as focuses of the axis of resistance. Well, to start with, the minute you leave the airport and you go for around 2 kilometers, guess where we go through? The exact spot where Soleimani and Mohandes were killed in the beginning of this decade, which I call the Raging 20s. There's a small monument to General Soleimani and Mohandes, which was the second of Hashd al-Shabi. So everything that we are living now in the Raging 20s started in the beginning in Baghdad. So in a sense, we can say that Baghdad started the history of this decade, because the big picture of this is something, of course, that no idiot advising Trump could explain to him. What they did was too little too late. What if they killed one of the leaders of the Iraqi resistance and the great mastermind planner of the resistance long term? Because the plans organized by Soleimani for years, in fact, they were already laid out. They were already explained to different leaderships of the axis of resistance, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Syrian militias, Iraqi outfits, etc. And it was only a matter of time to put it in place and put it in motion, which is what we saw last year, exactly. And now we are right in the middle of it, So this relationship, this military conceptual relationship, Iran-Iraq, which we could represent by the association between Soleimani and Mohandes, this is something that, from the point of view of the Iraqi government, of course, they know it by heart, but they cannot advertise it too much. And when they discuss with the West, they don't even touch the subject. All right. So it's a very, very fine line, but they are doing it brilliantly, I would say. For instance, when you talk to the advisors of the prime minister, in one of the dinners, I sat with one of these guys, extremely, extremely bright, and he was focusing on sustainable development, investments in education, investments in infrastructure. He mentioned China as well, but he also mentioned that no, we need the West and the Europeans to invest in development projects here as well, and the fact that now there is a sort of a national consensus that everybody has to work very hard to develop the country as fast as possible. Another official that I talked the day before, he told me something that was absolutely crucial. He said, "Look, if Daesh was not in the picture, this brought us back so many years. We would have been much more advanced by now if there was no Daesh." And then I grilled him about numbers, etc. Basically, this is the official position. There are only between 200 and 300 Daesh left in the Syria-Iraqi border in the middle of nowhere, scattered villages protected by local tribes, but they are, let's say that the threat is contained, essentially. So this is not a problem anymore. So now the terrorist angle in Iraq, at least for the moment, seems to have vanished. We don't know what's going to happen next, and of course, false flags, you name it, you name it, etc. But you see this drive of finally having a government that is universally recognized as a government of competent technocrats, that they're going to develop the country very, very fast, that Iraq is now on the way to reclaim its place as one of the absolute top nations in the Arab world and in the Islamic world. And in terms of the focus on Belt and Road, it's going to be one of the major focuses for China on the way between China and Europe. And there is the BRICS question. That was very, very interesting. I can say that I dared to make a suggestion, but I presented it as a modest proposal. I told the prime minister that would you consider writing an application to join BRICS? And he was taking notes. I love that. So he paid attention, because before I got that, I was saying, look, I'm sure all of you know that Palestine was invited to the BRICS summit in Kazan in October. And there's probably it's practically certain that there's going to be a special session in Kazan strictly dedicated to Palestine, with the BRICS and the BRICS outreach program. That is the guests that the BRICS invite for the summit. There'll be at least 5, 6, or 7 important countries. So we can foresee the possibility, let's say in the next few months or next year, Iraq also trying to get into BRICS, and they would have instant support from at least I would say the top 3: Russia, China, and Iran. And there would not be many resistance from the others. Not from the Emirates, as far as I could see. And in the case of Saudi Arabia, it's complicated because nobody knows what Saudi Arabia is in relation to BRICS. Not even them. Right. They say they are part of BRICS, but they are not exactly part of BRICS. They go to some of the meetings, but it's only some of the meetings. So this is something that has to be clarified within the next few weeks before the summit. Are you in or out of BRICS, or are you just, wobbling? The prospect of Iraq in BRICS is absolutely fascinating. There will be everything to gain for them if that happens.
Well, I actually wanted to ask you about this. Now you brought up Saudi Arabia as kind of a counter example, but the question that I wanted to get to is actually one more that's a question about faith and culture and how it ties into competent governance. Because what I've noticed is that in many of the Shia governments, obviously, there is strong solidarity between not only the Shia governments, but of course with the Palestinian resistance, most notably Hamas, which is not a Shia organization, it's a Sunni organization. And this is not to say either that Sunni governments can't have this principle that's built in to their social structure and their governmental structure. But I'm just interested to get your thoughts about how the Shia faith in particular seems like it's been able to bolster the administration and governance of the state in a very effective way, especially in the case of Iran. And now we're seeing the resurgence of Iraq, which you laid out. And how important of a force has this been to support the sovereignty and cooperation, not only between the Palestinian resistance, but also in building that civilizational state in Southwest Asia and among the Islamic world. So I'm wondering if you speak to that.
Exactly. So, and this is one of the aspects of this new government that was particularly struck me. They are a bunch of very competent technocrats, essentially economists, very, very serious. They have a vision. In fact, the official Iraqi government policy is called Iraq First. It is a policy. Yes, it is a policy, and it has a program, a sustainable development program, So I would say that in a sense, the progress that they are making is even faster to what Iran did a few decades ago. They're catching up so fast in a matter of only 2 years. In fact, it's really mind-boggling. It helps, of course, that the relation with Iran is very close. Even Turkey, for instance, I went to revisit the Abu Hanifa Mosque, one of the top mosques in Baghdad. This is the mosque where the first anti-occupation protest started in 2003. At the time, the mosque was completely bombed out, etc. Now it's perfectly reconstructed, etc. And attached to the mosque, there is a wonderful gallery of fabulous Sufi objects that they found around Mesopotamia. And guess who sponsors the whole thing? A Turkish cultural foundation. Very, very cool, right? So relations with Turkey are also very close. Turkish building companies, construction companies are en masse across rebuilding Iraq. Exactly. And so this is an example, not only in terms of, let's say, Shiite bureaucracy in government, but an example to the whole Islamic world of how you can rebuild the cradle of civilization, literally, in record time, and erase the recent past, finally, purging all their misery, inflicted misery from the outside, of course.
It's been a beautiful thing to see, and your description really it just impresses me. It must have been such a beautiful experience.
It was, wow. It was very emotional. Absolutely, it was very, very emotional. Can you imagine? You go back to a country that you've been following for, in my case, 24, 25 years, and for the first time you get the feeling that this is a relatively normal society. It's a shock, and
Right.
it was fascinating to talk to the young. I talked to a lot of young, very, very young people who have no memory whatsoever of the 2000s.
I mean, it's amazing to see that kind of the spiritual resurgence of the people, obviously, and the sense of normality and normalization that's taken place from the last 20 years. Obviously, it's a godsend, I'm sure, for the people living in the country and for the people that get to visit. But I kind of wanted to get maybe to a little bit more of it's not a boring piece of it, but kind of one of the underlying fundamental pieces that you mentioned is just how much infrastructure has been built up over the course of the last decade, and the role that China has played. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about that, like what you observed while you were there. Was it mostly a case of kind of the public infrastructure being rebuilt? What else was really notable about? You mentioned some of the cafes and places that you went, but I'm kind of interested to hear. I guess there's two pieces. One, what were some of the most notable kind of developments in terms of the infrastructure that you noticed and the way that it was progressing and what countries were involved? And then two, how is this affecting the popular culture? What are people kind of, what is the impact of this, I guess, in the way that people view these other countries, whether it's Russia or China or some of the other regional players who are helping facilitate this economic revival, if you want to call it that?
Well, I wish I had more time to travel. We didn't have much time to travel this time. I wish I could have gone to Basra, for instance, to see the works on the expansion of the port. In fact, the upgrading and the expansion of Basra port, which is going to be the fulcrum of the future Belt and Road. Najaf, which is close to Najaf is very impressive because Najaf, there's a lot of Iranian investment. So Najaf used to be a little more than a village around the shrine of Imam Ali, and now it's a huge, formerly small city. It's a mid-sized city, rebuilt all over, bustling, with a very, very strong trade and commerce tradition. everybody is in business, and it's you see the affluent middle class of Iraq. Same thing in Baghdad. In Baghdad, you see when you go to these fish restaurants by the Tigris, for instance, there is a complex. One of them is called 1001 Nights. Fascinating. So this is where the middle class and the upper middle class of Baghdad goes with their families. You could feel that you are in Doha or in Dubai, for instance. Of course, it's not as glitzy as in Doha or Dubai, but it's the same spirit, you know. And apart from the bazaars, businesses around Baghdad, uh, you see commercial streets, you know, back to back, and it's working, and people are buying. So there is a purchasing power. Purchasing power is back. You know, there is an effort by the government to raise salaries as well. So of course, this is all financed by oil money. And when it comes to oil money, we know that China is one of the main customers of Iraq oil. In fact, China buys, if I'm not mistaken, nearly 50% of Iraq's oil production. It's massive, massive, right? And the Chinese even have a program which is fascinating. They build schools. Part of the deal when they buy Iraqi oil, they repay by building. I was told more than 1,000 schools so far. So they are directly involved in this education drive of the Iraqi government. Fascinating, right? I didn't see anything similar coming from the Europeans. Maybe there is. If there is, I didn't see it anyway.
Oh, we're still in the West. We're still doing school remote. So all the schools we build for you guys will be online. So we're building schools too. They're just online. You can't see them. It's fine.
Well, we're also in the period of transitioning away from, while China is transitioning to soft power, we're transitioning toward coercive power.
Yes.
Which is very clear and is actually the subject of our next topic, which was the arrest of Pavel Durov in France. So this is the Telegram CEO, a very famous individual, a very rich individual, obviously. Telegram has been a extremely important app, especially in regards to the Ukraine war, as a source of information from both sides of the front, really. The encrypted service it provides, the blockchain technology, allows a level of security and a flow of information that you don't necessarily get with other apps, right? And so now Mr. Durov was targeted by French authorities under the pretext that the app was facilitating all of this criminal activity, fraud, you name it. He was arrested when his private jet landed in France, and it was actually notable that the charge, his warrant wasn't even filed until he touched down. So literally, he didn't even have a chance to escape. They filed the warrant, he touched down, they arrested him. But the implications of this are pretty significant, and I want to get your take on it because in the West, in the United States, we've seen a real intent to crack down on free speech, especially speech that is associated with Russian media organizations. And the U.S. intelligence agencies and the State Department has basically said that they were going to be opening up wide-ranging investigations into anybody who coordinates or cooperates with Russian media. So, we have this kind of chilling speech regime in the West that is taking effect. Obviously, we have some very important elections coming up in the United States as well. Don't need to get into that. But what do you make of all of this and the way that the West is going in this kind of liberal world order, which has always prided itself and held itself up to having this standard of free speech and being the marketplace of ideas? What do you make of some of these developments recently?
Well, my column came out on Sputnik yesterday. It's already in fact, it's already circulating in the US as well. This is a very long story. It did not start last week or even a few weeks before and all that. This story started around 2016, at least. Telegram France, and worse. Telegram Macron. And well, I think a lot of people know that I lived part of the year in Paris, so I have to be careful in a lot of things that I say, even if I don't. But anyway, Macron, when Pavel Durov left Russia because he did not agree with giving information about Telegram users to the government. And this was complicated because it was not that the Russian government wanted full access to. In the case of the FSB, for instance, the FSB wanted to have access to sensitive information on a case-by-case basis in terms of their counterterrorism operations. And even that, Pavel Durov at the time said no. So he left Russia, essentially. And he settled in Dubai, of course. He set up shop in Dubai. But Macron was already paying attention, in fact. He invited Pavel Durov to Paris. And basically he proposed, why don't you transfer Telegram to France? Durov said, no, I don't want that. It's being run the way my brother and I wanted to run, and we are settled in Dubai. There's no interference whatsoever by Dubai on what we do. At the same time, there was a discussion about obtaining French citizenship. And they said, I would accept a French passport, of course. So Macron personally intervened to get French citizenship to Pavel Durov. So he got that 3 years ago. And of course, this means that he could travel to France anytime he wanted, French citizen, etc. But he hasn't been there lately. Lately means the past few months, essentially. There was, according, and then they're changing their story all the time, the French authorities. There was apparently an investigation about all sorts of misdeeds committed by Telegram users that had started on July 8th, apparently. No, it did not start in July 8th. It was before, way before, in fact, months before. But there was no arrest warrant against Pavel or Nikolai. And now they changed the story again, saying that no, they were both under investigation. What happened on the day that he was arrested was there was no arrest warrant. The minute he stepped on his Embraer flight to fly to Paris, there was no arrest warrant. The pilot, he forwarded the flight plans to Paris. They were on the air. And while they were on the air entering French airspace, the arrest warrant was issued. So when he landed, he was arrested on the spot. Another very important thing. Le Canard Enchaîné. Le Canard Enchaîné is, I would say, the French equivalent of the Private Eye in London, but doubling as a serious investigative newspaper as well. It's satire, sarcasm, is a riot to read Le Canard, and they have informants literally everywhere. And the best informants that they have are police and security services. And one of these guys said basically that when he was arrested, Pavel told the guy who arrested him at the airport, look, I'm here to have dinner with the president. So if this is really true, he has no reason to lie. So if this is really true, we are contemplating a situation of the president of France sets up a trap against a French citizen, lying directly. Very, 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 very serious. Why all these things? In my column, I point to a lot of loose ends that converge to this being a very, very sophisticated operation where key instances of the collective West are involved. The Americans, of course, they at least encouraged this thing to go on. They gave the green light. But the main actors are the European Commission in Brussels and Paris, especially Paris because Macron needs something. So this is what he has been discussing with the toxic Medusa von der Leyen in Brussels for quite a while. Everybody knows that Europe has no social networks. In terms of technological prowess, I call it pathetic tech. The fabulous European Union social networks less than zero. So what's plan B? Okay, let's steal one. Let's grab one. So this is one of the possible scenarios for Telegram. The possibility that they could grab Telegram, or they could dismantle Telegram, or they could annex Telegram to a bunch of European owners, for instance. It's a possible scenario. Number two, if nothing happens, if Pavel does not collaborate, if the whole thing goes to trial, if he gets 20 years in jail, and he's going to live like Julian Assange in a French gaol, eating stale baguettes, well, they can always ban Telegram in Europe. Who cares? Telegram basically nowadays is the #1 social network for the global South, for the global majority, for BRICS. And more is going to be the social network for freedom of expression in the global South, in the global majority, and it's bound to grow up exponentially from now on. People are not dumb. They can see that this is going on, and they can see this is a political articulation, a very, very shabby political operation, in fact. One of the Russian analysts that I talked to before I wrote my column, the day I arrived here on Monday, he had some excellent observations on the reasons why the French are pulling that off, and in haste and in a very shabby way. They are desperate that Telegram is the weapon of choice of all those movements in the Sahel, from West Asia to from West Africa, to the Sahel, French neocolonialism. And they are desperate that people in Europe are getting their reliable information about the war, the proxy war in Ukraine between the collective West and Russia, from Telegram. So Telegram needs to be contained. So this is part of the French angle. The European angle is slightly more complicated because in Europe you have the Digital Services Act, which is the neo-Orwellian law that the European Commission excels because they have 27,000 fucking bureaucrats at the Parliament in Brussels. And this is what they come up with, legislation to basically fuck up people, which is what the Digital Services Act is, essentially. And, of course, interfere with all the major social networks. But the Digital Services Act is directed to the big guys, especially Facebook, and most of all, X. So the next target of the European Union is going to be Musk's X, no question. Telegram, let's say, is the preamble. And Telegram does not qualify to the Digital Services Act because they are too small in the European market. They have less than 40 million users a day in the EU, which does not qualify as a mega social network, etc. But now they're going to start getting much more because people are going to start migrating en masse all across Europe to Telegram. So one of the possibilities is to regulate Telegram, which is the Brussels angle. Another one is to bring Telegram to France, which Macron tried a few years ago, didn't work. And now he may be trying to, his goons, interrogators, and his judicial system try to come up with some sort of all sorts of pressure on Pavel, so Pavel would crack up and give them the encryption keys, which, by the way, he doesn't have. The guy who has the encryption keys, which are, let's say, they are rejuvenated all the time, is Nikolai. He's a super smart, massive PhD brother, right? So there are different layers in the whole story. We have a direct attack to a social network that is a platform for self-expression all over the global south. So this is, in a sense, is also a war, part of the war of the collective West against the global south. There is the Russian element to the whole story, and the Russophobia element to the whole story, which we should not dismiss it at all. Pavel Durov is young, good-looking, ultra successful, and he came up with a social network that is beyond successful all over the world. So you can imagine the envy by this mediocre bureaucratic strata from Brussels to Paris and beyond. And this is something that if you know how Brussels works and you know how Paris works, yes, these people are mediocre. It's a bunch of fucking losers, and they're envious. So this element is also very, very important. And don't forget that Durov is Russian. So, fits the bill completely. What they plan to do, we still don't know. It will depend on what this French magistrate will decide. Is he going to release Pavel Durov, or he's going to be charged with all those stupid list of charges that they are circulating in English already for a few days, and he's being accused basically of being complicit of everything under the sun: drug trafficking, pedophilia, money laundering, you name it, financing terrorist organizations, etc. So the CEO of the company is being accused for stuff that users of the platform are doing, which is completely absurd. So if this goes to court and there's a crack legal team defending Pavel Durov, which I'm sure he'll be able to afford, this thing could be smashed to smithereens in court. So let's see if the French magistrate decides to go this way, right? So this is an evolving story that's been going on for years, in fact, and now it's coming to the crunch.
I love finding like the interconnectedness of everything. So just for my own tinfoil hat's sake, France loses its foothold in Africa, Russia moves in. America loses its foothold in Africa, Russia moves in. Telegram is utilized by the Russian armed forces. Here we go. Azerbaijan wants to go into BRICS. Armenia enters weapons contracts. How much of this is politically motivated, and that how much is Pavel just a pawn?
That's exactly the point, dear Sarah. It is an enormously politically motivated operation. And the fact that Le Petit Roi himself says it's not means that it is. You can ask anybody in the streets of Paris, and they're going to give you exactly the same answer that I'm giving you.
How is France doing in terms of empire, though? And I mean, Macron you go there often. Macron just said he refuses to accept the winning government, and now we have this. So is France also grasping at straws to hold on to the last powers?
Yes. Yeah, because the empire is disappearing in front of their eyes. And if they lose the West African empire, they are done. Can you imagine that Jacques Chirac in the 70s was already saying that if we lose our colonies in Africa, we are finished as a great power? Everybody of the French establishment, they know that. And that's why they are absolutely terrified. And it's going down little by little. It's one domino after another. So you're going to see from West Africa across the Sahel, by the end of next year or in 2 years, bye France completely. And of course, all the system that they put in place of exploiting the colonies, the French franc, the fact that French companies have a priority to invest and monopolize industry and commerce in all these countries, this is going to disappear completely. So you can imagine how absolute desperate that they are. And of course, in terms of Ukraine, obviously, because Macron conducts the French policy on Ukraine like Ukraine is a matter of national security in France, and he cannot back down. He cornered himself as well, just like all the leadership of different parts of the European Union, because the policy is not a national policy. The policy is dictated by Brussels. And when I say Brussels, it's not even the European Commission, it's NATO. In fact, it's NATO dictating policy to the European Commission, dictating policy to the capitals. That's how the system works, and they cannot back down. And now that they see that the whole project Ukraine is totally collapsing, extra despair. So when you put the Telegram story into this bigger context, it's really a shabby operation trying to salvage something for them. A little bit of their pride, a little bit of, okay, we're going to have a tech, an European tech company, if they were able to dismember Telegram or take over Telegram, which I'm not sure they have the possibilities to. We still don't know who are the major investors in Telegram at the moment. This is something that we should do for the next few weeks, in fact. A breakdown of who's controlling Telegram. So it's too little too late, essentially. But it's the degree of it's so low level. It's the level of pickpockets in the street. If Macron really did that, after he was rebuffed a few years ago, okay, transfer Telegram to France. He gives a passport to the guy. He invites the guy to have dinner with him, and then he's arrested at the airport. Man, this is beyond. This is low-level mafia stuff, which of course it fits the character. Macron is a psychopath, a lowly psychopath, in fact.
Well, I agree on that for sure. But every decision, it seems like, the French government, not only the French government, but governments of the West in general, make in order to squash dissent, it seems like it's met with at least a degree of blowback. And in this case, with Telegram, we saw the app soar in popularity over the course of the last few days, which might also speak to some of the incompetence of the bureaucracy and their decision-making and their strategy overall. But of course, they still have the ready-made state machinery at their hands, right? Ultimately, they still have significant power and influence, even if they are disliked by the people or are more and more unpopular with the mass of people, which seems to be obvious, right? With the people, especially in French society, looking more toward the right and the left, respectively. But what do you see as the future for Western governments like France? I mean, you mentioned the erosion of their colonial holdings in West Africa being something that could doom them, but how do you see this playing out for what I would call the establishment center, which is trying desperately to maintain control? And how much longer can they continue to be subservient to the interests of NATO and the United States without seeing a major popular uprising? What do you think about that?
Well, we come back to the same problem of credible political alternatives, not guided by populists, by opportunists, which is the case in France, especially, or old figures that basically don't have appeal for the young generations. And the fact that people, if you propose a radical turning upside down of the system anywhere in the collective West, it won't go anywhere. You need a gradualist strategy. You need to be extremely clever how you build articulate your political connections, and this is a process that takes years. You cannot do this in 1 year or two, or within an electoral cycle. For instance, the current polarization in France between this is what the center, between commas, calls it: extreme left and extreme right. No, there's no these people at the new Front Populaire in France. They're not extreme left. They are shades of old school leftism of the 60s and 70s mixed with a woke avalanche all over the spectrum, and a few progressives in between, And Marine Le Pen's party is not an extreme right party. They are several levels of institutional racism inside the party. No question about that. But when you look at their economic program, it's in defense of the French working class, which the so-called left, or what we call in Paris la gauche caviar, those that goes to those expensive brasseries in the Rive Gauche in Paris, they don't give a fuck about the working class anywhere in Paris, in the suburbs, in the periphery, or in the rest of France. So labels don't work anymore. Michael Hudson has been brilliant talking about we need to recategorize terminologically this whole left-right thing. This doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, what does exist for all of us, and we are all subject to it, is the 1% against the rest. So it is the 1% against all of us. This is the only dichotomy that exists. Sarah, you want to say something?
Well, I wanted to let you go lay down, but first I wanted to just touch on this because we did get a super chat about it, and this is breaking news right now. So I just want to kind of get your thoughts on the hypotheticals.
Oh, yes.
You're one of our only guests that will actually do hypotheticals with me. But we have some sort of aircraft that it has been downed in Syria. First, for initial reports said it was a U.S. jet. Second, then they said it could be Russia, Turkish, or Syrian. Now we're getting reports that it is Syrian, shot down by either United
States. A U.S. fighter plane? Is that it? I'm looking at it right now.
I think it's a Syrian jet, judging by the parachute. What are the implications either way? What if it's an American jet, and what if it's a Syrian jet? What are the implications?
The U.S. fighter plane crashes in northeastern Syria, right? Well, we don't know what happened. So
no, we don't even know if it's been shot down. And we also have word that a drone's been shot down as well.
Exactly.
So things are getting really chaotic in Syria. How do you feel about Assad's recent overtures to Turkey, them being kind of rebuffed, and then him kind of saying, I'm being rebuffed, and now we kind of have this sort of entanglement?
Sarah, it's too early to tell, because this ballet between Assad and Erdogan, this is something that could go on for another year, at least. Erdogan knows very well the conditions established by Assad for a meeting. And he's not ready to fulfill these conditions, And his support for that bunch of, how can he describe it, goons inside Syrian territory, the MIT, Turkish intelligence, they are not going to abandon these people just like that, It's very handy for them. So this could go on for a long time. We need a mediator between both. And guess who's the only possible mediator? Russia. But Russia, at the moment, they have so much to deal with, apart from what's going on in Donbass, Kursk, and preparing the BRICS summit in less than 2 months here in Kazan. They have no time for it.
Well,
Turkey is going to be in Kazan, interesting, as a guest.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that, and I thought that it was interesting with Azerbaijan. Is Turkey?
I still don't, Sarah. I still don't know if Syria is going to be invited to the BRICS outreach format. This would be perfect.
Yeah.
To get Syrian and Turkish diplomats start discussing seriously in Kazan. Perfect.
I think that the BRICS is going to be an opportunity for a lot. We have Palestine receiving an invitation, Syria probably receiving an invitation, Azerbaijan is applying, so that means they'll be in attendance, and Turkey as an observer. Really interesting things happening to BRICS. It kind of shows the acceleration of the crisis in the West. I think I don't know if they'll wake up in time, but we'll see. Well, Pepe, you're in Moscow now. Where are you off to next after you're done recovering from the Iran?
next week is one of my favorites during the year. I'm going to Vladivostok.
Yeah, I know you love
For
Vladivostok.
the Eastern Economic Forum. This is one of my absolute musts because I am a big fan of Siberia, the Far East, the Far North, etc. And I have in my list of trips, it's included a northern Arctic Silk Road trip as soon as I have the chance to do it, you know. And of course, ideally, I would drop everything and retire to Kamchatka in the middle of the forest in front of the volcano. And so I could have early morning conversation with bears.
Bears. You'll be the bear whisperer.
My idea of bliss.
That sounds great to me too.
Well, hopefully we'll see Pepe the Bear Whisperer in our near future. Please go visit the website, guys. Please follow Pepe on Twitter and Telegram. And make sure you get on Telegram now before they ban the app everywhere. You won't be able to download it anymore. Pepe, it's always a pleasure. You're always, even when you're sick, you're still uplifting. Thank you so much. And thank you again for the Charmine Connect. My God, she's an angel. She is just
she's wonderful, isn't she?
Just, oh my God, what an inspiration. Well, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for us and everything that our subscribers have done for us. So thank you guys for tuning in. Please, again, visit the website, buy some merch, support us, subscribe. We love you guys. And we'll see you in the spaces because there's a lot of breaking news coming out right now. Have a good one.
Thank you, guys. Stay strong.